Happy May the 4th day to everybody. I'm going to put Bailey on the spot and James on the spot first, and I told him I was going to do this in advance. And to kick it off, ask you what your favorite Star Wars movie is.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's so good to be here with all of you guys. I didn't know what to expect. I love that this is so intimate. But back to the very important issue at hand, my favorite Star Wars movie has to be Rogue One. I love the quote that rebellions are built on hope. I am an eternal optimist at heart. I'm also a little bit of maybe a change agent, like to kind of grind people's gears sometimes. So I think that rebellions start by first believing you can and then really rallying the gang and never giving up. So that's mine.
How about you, James?
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's a great question. I was thinking, I could be creative and go with Force Awakens or Rogue One to kick this off, but I didn't want to start off by just lying to a group of government officials and congressional staffers. So I have to go with episode 5. Introduction of Yoda, Lando, just an all-time epic film. So that's where I'm at, old school.
That's great. I agree with you. I'm a huge Rogue One fan for many, many reasons, but we can get to that later. I'm super excited about this discussion because it's incredibly timely with what's going on in Ukraine and Russia and the steady state of alerts that are coming out on SCADA systems and other bits and pieces. And this is an opportunity for us to get together and talk about the primary focus of both NSA and then the DHS when it comes to this sort of environment. So for the audience, what is the NSA's primary focus when it comes to domestic cybersecurity? And then James, once Bailey's done, I kind of want to turn to you and what your sort of equities and focus is. So Bailey.
Sure, thanks. So NSA has 2 missions broadly: foreign intelligence, cybersecurity. Foreign intelligence obviously is how we collect and intercept and decrypt the communications of our foreign adversaries. So analyzing them, processing them, and then taking those insights to share with senior leaders, policymakers, et cetera. And so then conversely, our cybersecurity mission is how we keep our adversaries from doing that to us. So in terms of our domestic focus, we focus on 2 things. First, national security systems, which are really any systems that handle classified information or are otherwise sensitive to military and intelligence activities. So things like drones, weapons and space systems, nuclear command and control, or even top secret classified networks. We also really focus on the defense industrial base, or the DIB, and those are the technology, servicing, and manufacturing companies that support the DoD. That's the lawyer definition. In my head, I think about that as all of those companies that really contract with DoD. And so then our focus domestically, again, is really taking what we know from foreign threat intel about our adversaries, Russia, China, and using that to inform domestic cybersecurity, helping network defenders prioritize their efforts against the most current threats, and really partnering with CISA to then drive defense that scales across all of the critical infrastructure sectors.
So James, how do you prioritize the sort of domestic cybersecurity mission, and how does that work in relation to the NSA?
Yeah, great question. It is. I mean, our mission is a vast one, right? At its core, and my own leadership speaks about this enough. But CISA really is at its core the nation's risk advisor, right? So we are kind of in a sweet spot that we're not a regulatory or a law enforcement entity. At the end of the day, our goal is to help advise, partner with, drive down risk through various different mechanisms. Service delivery is certainly one of them. Various different technical service delivery, everything from non-intrusive types of vulnerability scanning and external facing services, all the way up to, for specific entities, a little bit more intrusive of service delivery, such as pen testing and architecture design reviews and things like that. Technical advisories, engagement. We have key focuses on state and local and civilian network defense. So anything civilian.gov, non-DoD related security is within our purview. Within the private sector, we are unlike the NSA, a 16 sector focused organization. So we have close partnerships with hundreds of companies that we're working with to better understand threats from an information sharing standpoint, and when needed, responding and recovering to threats. So we are at its core asset response, understanding what a threat is. If it rises to the level of a finished product, that's something that we put out with our interagency partners to better advise critical infrastructure, states, federal government as a whole. That's our core mission from a critical infrastructure and government security standpoint.
So I can see one of the key issues that's come up in the past before is sort of the coordination and cooperation between a very specific and very security-heavy mission for the NSA and a very public-facing mission for CISA. I'm curious if you can give us some examples of collaboration that has worked. And I know presumably people in the audience have seen the processes and the alerts that have come out and warnings. How does that work in practice? And how do you make sure that you guys are working both together to forward that mission?
Right, that's a great question. So when we stood up the NSA Cybersecurity Directorate about 2 years ago, one of the things that we heard loud and clear is that it is actually extremely unhelpful when multiple government agencies release very similar versions of the same guidance about the same thing. And so we put a huge focus at that time on really integrating our technologists across NSA, CISA, and FBI, as well as our experts on the foreign cyber threat, bringing people together, weekly meetings to say, really, okay, we're going to start releasing comprehensive, joint, actionable guidance so that folks only have to go to one place to get what they need. So I think that's a pretty good example of how we've tried to partner and coordinate, and those are often publicly published on our website, on CISA's website. One example of that that's probably particularly interesting to this crowd is last week, CISA, the Department of Energy, and NSA partnered to release an advisory with detection and mitigation techniques for a new ICS SCADA malware called Pipe Dream or In Controller, depending on who you talk to. So that's one example. The other thing that I kind of wanted to highlight is election security. So that's an enduring mission across both of our agencies, and that's another spot where we have really strong partnership. And so for election security, again, our focus is the away game. What are our adversaries' intentions and capabilities in terms of interference or influence? And then we work with CISA to say, hey, here's IOCs, here's malicious IP addresses, here's other technical indicators and actionable information that you can then use to share with state and local officials, et cetera, to really enable that defense of the homeland, so to speak.
So from James, we want to jump in on that and sort of how, from your perspective, does the collaboration and coordination process work, specifically with the focus that you have domestically?
Yeah, appreciate that. And Bailey nailed it. I mean, with the stand up of the collaboration center on the NSA side, really a few ways that I've seen that really transform not only our joint kind of engagement approach and what we're saying externally to critical infrastructure, but also just the streamlined approach that's helped us take, specifically my team, who's on the hook for owning a lot of the private sector partnerships with industry, to be able to streamline the approach. Just know exactly to a team, who I should go to on the NSA side, who I should be working with, who owns what pieces of this, from an analytic capability to a partnership capability. A big piece of this that Bailey touched on is just the engagement approach that we now have, I think, between CISA, the NSA, and the FBI, right? I think, in years past, kind of a use case and a headache for large, whether it's communications providers or IT sector companies who we have joint partnerships with, is that when we have a bad day, they have outreach from various different government agencies, all looking to sync and collaborate and get on the same page. And I think, the JCDC being very closely aligned now with the collaboration center on the NSA side, is that we're doing a lot of this jointly now. And that's it's a very helpful and economic approach for industry, just to be able to both put a person to an issue whenever we're working with them jointly, but at the same time, it just shows coordination on the government side that I think in years past was probably lacking from an engagement standpoint. The analytics are also huge. The energy sector product, just thinking off the top of my head, a host of ways that we've been external facing, from joint analytics, ransomware trends, the mitigation guidance for Log4j vulnerabilities, hardening VPNs, Russian cyber threats to the US. We're putting our shields on this jointly now. Whereas in years past, a lot of the collaboration would be done behind the scenes, and and one of our agencies would put it out, and we'd have some kind of equities in it. But speaking with one voice now when we're putting things out, to the community, I do think it helps show really a much more coordinated approach. And kind of the last piece that I'll put to this is that we do share between the national security community overall. We do have a lot of the same touch points with industry. That's for various different equities and for different reasons. The JCDC and the Collaboration Center on the NSA, we have a lot of overlap with partners as well. So, showing our coordination both on things that aren't going to be made public, analytics that we're working on that we want to bring industry into from a visibility standpoint or kind of a subject matter expertise standpoint on the voluntary side, doing that jointly, making sure that we're releasing things, in coordination with each other to not sow confusion in industry. I think I'd say over the past year to year and a half, we've really made a lot of good progress over there, and it's a great partnership in my opinion. It makes our lives a lot easier from an industry engagement approach for sure.
It's fantastic to see how the organizations have developed and built this partnership, which you both have discussed. I'm curious if we reflect on recent history, going back 10, 15 years, there's been challenges in dealing with sort of the public facing aspect of it. And reflecting on that, how do your organizations respectively sort of build and protect the trust with the public partners and try to communicate that critical information and sort of establish that trust?
I love that question. Trust is so foundational to everything that we do. And so actually taking a step back, when NSA created the cybersecurity directorate, one of the things that we recognized is, hey, as an IC agency, maybe we haven't always been the friendliness or most approachable agency in the block. And so we really recognize, though, that when, we release guidance about a nation state threat or a vulnerability or whatever it may be, we want people to jump to take action. And people will not take action unless they trust the source of that guidance, and rightly so. So with the stand-up of the directorate, we put a huge focus on building trust through transparency. We had media days where we actually brought the media into our 24/7 operations floor, where we actually run cyber operations. We joined Twitter, which might not be scary for you guys, but it was really scary for the person that was like, okay, sign up. All right, what's my first tweet? So, doing things like speaking engagements. And then the other thing that we tried to do a little bit differently is publish an unprecedented amount of information and guidance on our website that would previously only be available through government to government channels. We said, this is broadly applicable. We need to stand by, what we're releasing out, and we published it on our website, things like guidance for post-quantum, just to name one. Now in the NSA Cybersecurity Collaboration Center, we are working with private sector partners who obviously have sensitive proprietary information that we need to protect. And so we've kind of built on our foundation of building that trust, doing that outreach, meeting people where they live, and we have robust agreements that are written, they're transparent, that'll say, here's how we're going to work together, here's how we're going to protect each other's information, et cetera, the handling caveats, et cetera, that's associated with that. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention that many people might not realize is that NSA has a compliance office as well as a civil liberties and privacy office. And those offices not only help us do what's legally right, but also just make the better choice out of two choices when things may be vague. So trust is hugely important to us. We're constantly working to build and maintain it. And so to that end, thank you guys for having us here and giving us an opportunity to talk about that, because these forums are so important for building those bridges.
So James, how about on your end in terms of building and protecting that public trust and communication side?
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I said up front, like, CISA is a kind of a sweet spot to be from an industry engagement standpoint, but more generally for the mission of the agency, because we're not a law enforcement agency and we're not a regulator, so we don't have some of the authorities and powers to garner information that some of those agencies do, which is a great thing for building partnerships. But at the end of the day, we're not a regulator and we're not a law enforcement agency, so we lack some of the tools that other agencies do. So trust and transparency is is our everyday life, right? Like that is the kind of the building block by which we foster in good faith partnerships to share information, key technical information in terms of incident response and global visibility, to build a model that's voluntary in nature, no money exchanged, and having private sector agencies, private sector companies really come to the table and see the value proposition in it, right? Coordinating on the government side, that goes a long way in gaining buy-in from industry for sure, removing barriers internally to show exactly how we handle information that's submitted. The last thing that we want is kind of a passive one-way, no feedback loop to some of our core partners within critical infrastructure when they do submit, whether it be incident information or kind of sightings and indicators that they're seeing out there in the wild. Really having down to each in particular share kind of a feedback loop on A, what we can do with it, B, where we can share it further, or C, can I loop in, our colleagues at FBI and NSA to have further conversations on the information that's submitted. That piece goes a long way, just showing them internally how we're going to treat it, what we can do with it. And ultimately, like I said, just acting in good faith. I think, there's a separate component to this that's more of a cultural one that I think our director, Jenny Sterling now, and Chris Krebs before her, have really sought to tear down in terms of the wall between government sits over here and industry sits over here. And in the middle, we kind of just throw information over the wall at each other. Listing public, private companies now in some of our publications, the social media aspect that Bailey had mentioned, calling out companies when they help work with us and vice versa, from a JCDC standpoint. So it's really creating kind of a culture and a model of joint partnership, as opposed to we own this group and you kind of come sit at the table and there's that barrier there. I think kind of lifting the curtain back and allowing industry in particular to see how we operate, what's useful to us, where they play from a capabilities and visibility standpoint into some of our operations, I think just goes a long way into gaining buy-in and showing at the end of the day the value proposition for a free partnership, right?
It's really interesting. I want to build off of that because something you had worked on before your current position was the automated indicator system, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And I'm curious what the future of sort of this cooperation looks like when we're looking at threats that are coming faster, more machine to machine, and how that collaboration is going to work when you're going to be under assault more frequently and from different vectors. Is the system going to be the same? Are you imagining some more automation side, or like what do you think the future of this cooperation looks like?
That's a great question.
Yeah, go ahead, Bailey.
No, all you, man.
No, just gonna say, I mean, AIS in and of itself, it's the acknowledgement, and to be honest, a lot of our stakeholders out within industry are already there in terms of machine to machine, speed of information sharing to apply to systems. From our standpoint, it's almost treated as like a tool, right? It's a tool for information exchange that augments what we need to be collaborating on at the end of the day. So whether it's a Russian threat, whether it's ransomware threat, anything that's machine readable or ingestible to get out to industry, we'll have that as a tool or mechanism to do that. At the same time, it has to be treated as just a tool, right? We can't remove, in many cases, the analytics and the people that drive some of the decision making and thought from that equation. So it really is I think a hybrid approach specific to AIS. We're moving through a lot of changes on our end to make that tool, I'll keep using that word, a better asset for critical infrastructure writ large. But in terms of raw indicator sharing or tools that we use to collaborate with industry, it's everywhere from MISP to Slack to file transfers, to share malware samples and things like that. And I keep going back to that theme of culture. We oftentimes, it can't just be a government owned or operated system that we use. Sometimes we have to jump in with industry and use their tools as well. So it's a critical piece of it from a speed perspective. But some of our best collaboration and a lot of the magic happens to help solve these issues is still at this point very analyst driven.
So how do you see the collaboration process changing in the future?
Yeah, I think
growing?
That was a great answer. I think obviously we have to invest more in automated tools that really scale and enable that to happen more in real time. But I would also agree with James that what we have found is that our partners really value those contextual conversations. The private sector has really broad visibility on threats. And so often we're finding that they want that in-person conversation that helps them contextualize and characterize what they're seeing. So certainly that model is working really well for us right now. And then in the future, we're going to, invest in those automated capabilities so that we can scale that.
I think we're running up on the sort of last few moments here, and I kind of want to give you both a chance to sort of leave a final message with the audience here. I mean, we started out demystifying the NSA and CISA, exploring how you both collaborate and what that looks like in practice. But what is the key message you would like the audience to take away from your perspective and James from yours?
That's a tough one. I think that I hope that we're changing this, but I think that sometimes people don't really understand NSA, or they think of it as, this big spooky thing, when really it's people like me, like you, like other people in this room that are so diverse in terms of background, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, neurodiversity. But everybody comes in and you swear an oath to the Constitution, and that's kind of the thing that we all have in common and that holds us together. So really just knowing that there's people behind the big building off of 32, and knowing how much we value the partnership, events like this one, people like you guys, and the final thing I would say is feedback is a gift. We love feedback. So as we continue to try to partner with the private sector and, really rapidly harden the nation's cybersecurity, welcome feedback from how we can better do that.
And James, last word.
Yeah, appreciate the opportunity here. I think one thing that I'd want to leave the group with here is that, when we're out at conferences or on panels or things like that, oftentimes, the best way to engage and learn what we're all about and how a partnership could work is just to start the conversation, right? Our job at the end of the day, it's an operational one, but we're not going to, pigeonhole each particular company into one engagement model. There could be the need to bring in subject matter expertise from a host of different teams, and we kind of tailor that based on what the organization is and what their levels of maturity is and what they might need. So kind of, speaking on the NSA, CISA is a very external facing organization, but at the same time, it could be tough to start that engagement. Whether you're a smaller mid-sized business and you don't know if you can take in information or apply those kind of things. We tailor the conversation to these entities, because at the end of the day, if we're trying to be a risk advisor, we have to have a hybrid approach into how we're dealing with the actual advice that we're giving and the services that we're offering. Ultimately, you can rest assured that at the end of the day, NSA, CISA, FBI, the rest of the national security community are very focused and putting a lot of resources into the behind the scenes collaboration aspect of it to make it a more seamless approach to be able to engage government to solve these threats. But I really appreciate the time today.
Well, thank you very much, James and Bailey, for a wonderful conversation. Thank you all for sitting through this heat.